publicity about your acquisition of the boat this summer? The Princess, is that what
I
we call
bought a
it?
boat from Adnan Khashoggi, which was formerly called the Nabila. And
Nabila.
It's a yacht. And
Adnan Khashoggi, excuse me for a second, is the world's largest arms trader?
I hate to admit it. Actually, it was from the Sultan of Brunei because he was security for a loan and a whole complicated thing. But
Now, what are those guys like?
oh, they're real sweethearts, I have to think. They're real sweethearts.
Adnan Khashoggi wasn't just rich, he was plugged into the world's bloodstream. In the 1980s, Time magazine crowned him the richest man alive. He hosted royalty and movie stars, politicians, the most important people on his yacht. The same yacht he would later sell to Donald Trump, which we'll get to in a bit. But behind the champagne and billion-dollar parties, he was moving something far more powerful than money, because Khashoggi didn't sell weapons, he sold access. Epstein, Mossad, Bin Laden, Iran-Contra, Lockheed Martin, Princess Diana, Vladimir Putin, somehow they all trace back to Khashoggi. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other famous events he's been tied to. The world called him an arms dealer. That's like calling a CIA a travel agency. In the 1970s, he was one of the richest men on earth. By the 1980s, he was at the center of every scandal you've ever heard of, from Iran-Contra to BCCI to Princess Diana to the Philippine royal family. And the most wild one being the mysterious link to Jeffrey Epstein, which requires its own deep dive. This is the never before told story of the man behind the world's darkest deals. Adnan Khashoggi was born in Mecca, Saudi Arabia in 1935. His father was the personal doctor to King Abdulaziz, the founder of the modern Saudi Arabia, a man who ruled the desert like an empire. That connection gave Adnan something more powerful than money: access. That placed the family in the inner circles of the Saudi elites. So already my man Adnan is being born into royalty and massive wealth. But then it begs the question, what would he do with it? He was educated at Victoria College in Egypt, a training ground for Middle Eastern elites. Many would attend here. And he also went to many US universities, including Stanford and Chico. These connections gave him early exposure to future royalty and business contacts. For example, while attending school in Egypt, one of his early connections happened to be meeting Hussein bin Talal, the future king of Jordan. That's just one. And from all accounts, after Egypt in 1952, he moves back to Jeddah, the second largest city in Saudi, where he works for a cousin that deals with importing goods. After studying briefly at Stanford and in Cairo, he dropped out and started brokering deals between the Saudi family and Western corporations. He was supposed to go to Colorado School of Mines to study petroleum like every other Middle Eastern from Saudi Arabia, but apparently he hated the weather and instead he went to Chico State in California, which, coming from California, is a notorious party school where he probably partied his butt off, just like he would later in his life. So his first true stab at starting his own business was when his father gave him money to buy his first car at 20. As he later told it, a major Saudi construction company was losing money and time because their trucks kept breaking down the desert. The sand would swallow their tires, the engines would overheat, so young Adnan Khashoggi used the money his father had given him to buy a car, and instead, he bought Kentworth trucks imported from America. They were heavier, wider, and built for rough terrain. He leased them to the construction firm, and that single move, practical, not glamorous, reportedly earned him his first $250,000. It was a mix of luck, but it was also, more important, insight. He had spotted a problem in a country growing too fast to notice its own bottlenecks. He sold the solution. And within a year, he was appointed as the official Saudi agent for Kenworth trucks. But this just wasn't about hauling sand. It was about learning how to broker deals, how to be the bridge between Saudi need and Western supply, which would become incredibly important in these years. Because remember, at this time, Saudi Arabia is not what it is today, where it's a bunch of royal elites that control the world's oils. They didn't have any money then, and was just another Middle Eastern country trying to find ways to grow. It wasn't until they struck gold in the way of oil, and that money started flowing into Saudi Arabia's largest construction company because they needed someone to start building the infrastructure for the country that was growing at an exponential rate. And that construction company was owned by Mohammed bin Laden. And yes, that is the father of Osama bin Laden. and is the king's construction man, the one with all the no-bid contracts to build up Saudi Arabia, making the bin Laden family a soon-to-be billionaire fortune. Mohammed bin Laden needed trucks, so Adnan, being the middleman connector he is and tied to Western supply, begins to help him with his trucks and eventually moving beyond that, and this grows his wealth where he's making 10% commission, growing him into a multi-millionaire very quickly in his 20s. Then in 1953, Ibn Saud dies, and King Saud takes Saudi throne. And this guy wants some of that Western moolah and knows Khashoggi is the guy to make it happen. So putting Khashoggi in the right place at the right time to see an even further explosion in his wealth. The king then gives him permission to start opening all these factories, brick, tire, furniture factories, and bringing the infrastructure up to par with the billions of oil they're making. He then became the sales agent for Chrysler, Fiat, Westland helicopters, and Rolls-Royces, negotiating everything from construction vehicles to luxury limos. So by his early 20s, Khashoggi had gone from the king's doctor's son to the king's dealer. So the tensions on the world stage are getting high with the Cold War and the rising takeover of communism, which Saudi Arabia actually feared. They were afraid that possibly the Soviet Union would invade Saudi Arabia for its oil if Russia's oils were compromised, which then makes the king tug on Adnan to make some deal with the White House to better protect Saudi Arabia in the event of that happening. The king's army is not that strong, and they need the weaponry to better develop the military. We only know what has been stated and reported, but through the 60s and 70s, Adnan Khashoggi became the middleman for the world's biggest defense companies: Lockheed Martin, Northrop, Raytheon. So apparently Saudi Arabia was going under massive infrastructure and military modernization under King Saud and later King Faisal. The kingdom had money, but no technical expertise. The West had weapons, but no political access. Khashoggi became the translator between the worlds. He was young, he was Western educated, he was charming, and he was very much trusted by the royal family thanks to his father's role as the king's doctor. That was the bridge that made him so valuable to take the leap to tell people and say, because of this, he's like, let me handle it. So they trust him, and he began attending the international trade fairs, visiting defense exhibitions in Europe, and cultivating executives at companies like Lockheed and Raytheon, all looking to expand in Saudi Arabia, looking for that good oil money. But why did he become the USA's key middleman during this time? And the pivotal moment that put Khashoggi as the #1 arms dealer was the 1956 Israeli invasion of Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula. Khashoggi brokered a deal of military trucks between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, where he made a $150,000 commission for this deal. And this would begin to see the trend of the Khashoggi billionaire lifestyle we all know today. In celebration of this massive arms deal, he throws a lavish party in a hotel in Paris, France. This will be the standard for all his other parties, which will have caviar, booze, and tons of women. It's important to point out these types of parties are not typical of Arab businessmen, and the significant figures that attend will go home telling the stories about how legendary Khashoggi's parties are. Throwing those parties, we learn how Khashoggi is with many of these dealings. He's fluent in American business and secrecy, and his negotiation style became infamous. He was known for waiving fees, bringing good energy to the meetings, and if you happen to attend any of these meetings and mention something you like or want, he would get it on the spot. Adnan's been described as having a well-kept mustache and being a short 5 foot 4 inches and over 200 pounds. Despite those, he was known for bringing a presence of energy of dominance. He was a very unassuming man, but he knew how to wine and dine those around him. Especially after a successful arms deal, what he would do is he would pay for tons of women to be there waiting for the gentleman who had attended the meeting to give them massages and possibly more. And if it developed further with one of these girls, Khashoggi would ultimately know. And sometimes information like that posed very valuable and something that maybe these powerful people wouldn't want getting out. Very Epstein-like, if you ask me. Now, I'm going to skip the timeline here because it's time to get to the famous defense contracts that he made hundreds of millions off of. Because between 1970 and 1975, Lockheed paid him $106 million in commissions, officially disclosed during the 1976 Lockheed bribery hearings in the US Senate. So possibly even more. Oh yeah, can't forget to mention that. By 1976, Khashoggi's quiet empire was about to be dragged into the light. the world's most powerful arms broker was suddenly on trial, not in a courtroom, but in the halls of the US Senate. It started with Lockheed Aircraft Corporation. The company was broke, desperate, and drowning in debt. To keep its factories running, Lockheed had spent years greasing palms around the world, paying millions to foreign officials through discreet middlemen. And the biggest of them all was Khashoggi. So Senator Frank Church's subcommittee on multinational corporations began exposing this system. Executives testified under oath that between 1970 and 1975, Lockheed had paid over $100 million in sales commissions to one Saudi intermediary. Money routed through Swiss and Lebanese accounts tied to Triad International. In plain English, Khashoggi had been the broker making the Saudi royal family comfortable enough to buy American weapons. When reporters cornered him, Khashoggi didn't flinch. He smiled. Quote, "I don't bribe," he said. "I get people to meet. I make things move." For him, it was just business. For Washington, it was a scandal. The revelations rocked governments worldwide. Japan's prime minister resigned over this, and European ministers faced indictments, and Lockheed's executives were forced out. In America, it birthed a new law, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977, banning U.S. companies from bribing foreign officials. But Adnan Khashoggi, he walked away richer, more famous, and more connected than ever. Because while senators debated morality, Khashoggi had already learned the truth. The real power isn't in legality, it's in leverage or blackmail. He took the publicity, turned it into mystique, and began his next act, moving deeper underground, away from the cameras, and into the world of covert finance and intelligence. He told the Americans he could speak the royal language. As one Time magazine piece noted, Lockheed had Adnan Khashoggi on a $10 million retainer because he was the only man who could close a deal with a prince. After the Lockheed windfall, Khashoggi faced a unique problem. His money was dirty, not illegal yet, but politically radioactive. He needed a legitimate corporate structure that can move profits, disguise commissions, and reinvest them globally. So in 1973, he created Triad International Holding Company. It was incorporated in Luxembourg with subsidiaries in Geneva, London, Riyadh, and New York. Luxembourg was a tax haven. Geneva provided privacy and access to the Swiss banks, which we know is a great place to put money. And Riyadh kept his ties to the Saudi royals visible. Khashoggi reportedly told associates the name Triad symbolized three pillars of global power: business, politics, and the third one is the most interesting: intelligence. But there's another layer. Triad in intelligence slang also implied a three-way network, a term sometimes used for covert joint ventures between CIA, BCCI, and Saudi intelligence. For Khashoggi, it was perfect branding. It positioned him as the man sitting at the intersection of corporate money, political muscle, and covert intelligence, the shadow triangle of modern geopolitics. At Khashoggi's peak in the mid-1980s, he was considered the wealthiest man alive with billions in his net worth. His company Triad bought 12 luxury properties around the world, not just for profit, but for diplomacy. New York, Paris, Geneva, Lebanon, Cannes, Beirut, Riyadh, that's just a few to name. Time magazine reported in '87 that Triad's hotels were neutral ground for princes, presidents, and spies. Khashoggi's wealth is in many facets. He was great because he divided his wealth. He partnered with Bechtel, Floor, and other Western contractors on oil and infrastructure projects. These partnerships gave him legitimate access to government contracts, perfect cover for intelligence networking. Khashoggi even managed to make deals with the Mormons of Utah and buy some diamond mines. His company Triad had its own private airline with Gulfstreams, DC-8s, and Boeing 707s used to shuttle diplomats, arms negotiators, and sometimes covert cargo. Each plane was registered to a different Triad subsidiary for plausible deniability. Not to mention, our boy Khashoggi was living that billionaire lifestyle. He not only flaunted his wealth, but he wanted to shove it in your face. The largest purchase he had was the $75 million Nabila yacht, named after his daughter. Here's where things get even stranger though, because Khashoggi was known as the middleman, brokering deals from his famous yacht, the Nabila. The super yacht was featured in the Bond film Never Say Never Again. and was later sold and became Donald Trump's and renamed it the Princess. As we know, Khashoggi, with his loose alleged intelligence ties and connections, supposedly bugged out the yacht with wires to capture any and all things that happened on there. It's alleged he would have girls on board, drugs, money, and food, and while he filmed it secretly, what does that mean? I don't know. I'll leave you guys to marinate on that, but that sounds very much like what our boy Epstein did. But on top of spending loads of money on materials, that wasn't enough. He also happened to spend it on the thrill of gambling. If you happen to be in the Las Vegas at the Sands Hotel in the 1970s or 80s, there was a high chance you would find Khashoggi gambling extreme high stakes. Khashoggi was known for being at the roulette table like a degenerate gambler, tossing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on bets, surrounded by women, some who were invited, others who he paid. He was known to spend as much as $250,000 at his peak. Time magazine said there are arms dealers, and then there's Adnan Khashoggi. Khashoggi had built a private network that stretched from the deserts of Saudi Arabia to the Pentagon. But behind all the champagne and gold, Khashoggi was building something darker, a global shadow network. In 1976, after Watergate crippled the CIA, the agency needed a way to keep doing its dirty work. Covert ops, cover-ups, coups, and foreign interventions without US congressional oversight. So, with Saudi money, France's intelligence, and Egypt's military, a secret alliance was born, the Safari Club. They used private financiers, not governments, to move money, weapons, and information, and the man who made it all possible was Adnan Khashoggi. He used BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, a Pakistani-run financial front used by spies, terrorists, and dictators alike. BCCI was essentially the CIA's black credit card. Through Khashoggi, funds flowed to African warlords, Middle Eastern militias, and secret US operations. He wasn't just selling weapons anymore. He was selling deniability. A Senate report later called BCCI the most corrupt financial institution in history. And Khashoggi was one of its biggest clients. He had a private intelligence service, a man who could move millions, buy governments, and leave no fingerprints. By the early 1980s, Adnan Khashoggi wasn't just a broker, he was a bridge, the unofficial middleman between Washington, Riyadh, Tel Aviv, and other countries. And to give you an idea of how connected and powerful Khashoggi was, if I haven't already, his entourage was invited to the White House countless times. Viviane Ventura, a good friend of Adnan Khashoggi who accompanied him on many of these excursions, has told people that presidents adored Adnan and treated him like the most important person on earth. On top of that, when he would be flying from countries, he would be met at the tarmac by the presidents of these countries.
I mean, one of the things we did that I went with him was we were invited for breakfast to the White House after the second investiture of President Nixon. But it's unbelievable how presidents adored him and treated him like he was the most important person on earth.
So by the time Adnan Khashoggi died, the yachts were gone, the accounts were empty, and the man once called the richest on earth had vanished from his own empire. But there's more. Now, decades later, new bombshell evidence is emerging. My deep dives through some CIA declassified documents, as well as some Senate report hearings, and international banking records reveal a web far more wide than anyone could have ever imagined. A secret meeting inside his French villa helped ignite Vladimir Putin's rise, which I'll get to. His family was tied to Princess Diana's final days. He worked hand in hand with Israel's future Prime Minister, Shimon Peres, and he financed the Iran-Contra network and laid the blueprint that Jeffrey Epstein would later perfect. So, in part 2, we will dig into what happened when that system collapsed, how Khashoggi's fortune mysteriously disappeared, how he became the banker of the CIA and Mossad's secret alliance, and the truth behind his quiet death in London that no one has ever really questioned. So my name is Alessi. If you haven't already, please like, comment, subscribe. Subscribing pushes this content out to new viewers so get more exposed. So I appreciate it in advance, and I will see you in the next one. Part 2 coming up.